We will now move on to the next presentation, which stays in the northern area of Perth. And I'd like to welcome Mark Dickson, who's the Director of Planning and Sustainability at the City of Wanneroo. And he's going to discuss a really innovative approach to development in Jindee. And it redefines the potential of greenfield development and sets a new benchmark really in livability and sustainable urban design. It's a groundbreaking form-based code developed by the project team to give rise to a truly unique community distinguished by its beautiful homes, leafy streets, profound sense of place. And I was lucky enough to visit Jindee in August, and it is really beautiful and very different and definitely has its own identity and sense of place. So he's going to talk a little bit about the form-based code process and the outcome, and then we'll be joined by Kath Evans from Hatch Roberts Day, who worked on the project, and Mike Day might jump back in too, and we'll have a few minutes for Q&A after Mark's presentation. But for now, I'll hand over to Mark and Kath.
Great. I'll just set this up and then Mark can get going. Hello, everybody. Just give us a moment. Share. Great. Hold on. Just got too many things up there. Slideshow. Beginning. Okay. All right, and we're ready to go. I'll hand over to Mark.
Great, thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm going to spend... can we just move that?
Yeah, just hold on. There you go.
I'm going to spend the next 50 minutes talking about the coastal development called Jindee in the northwest corridor of Perth. I'll give you a brief background to Jindee and an introduction to form-based codes, but want to spend most of the time showing you the difference between this development and typical outer metropolitan estates that we're planning in the northwest corridor. I'm not sure why I've shown you the slide on the right, because I think most of you will know where Perth is, but for those who don't, we're over on the western side. Importantly, on this side, the left-hand side, it shows where Jindee is in relation to the Perth CBD. We're about 40 kilometres northwest of the CBD. Jindee is the first form-based code development in Australia. There's numerous examples in the States, but Jindee is the first in Australia itself. It's 112 hectares. The first home was completed in 2019, and as you can see from the image, it's in its infancy in terms of development. There's only a few stages that have been completed, and development surrounding the estate is pretty much completed. It's owned by Estates Development Company, which are a family-based company. They've owned the land since 1978. The story was that the great-grandfather of the current family members rode out on a horse to look at the land back in the day. Given its remoteness, it was the only way of going out to look at the site, and they ended up acquiring the land. So it's been in family ownership for about 45 years. Jindee is very different to other developments. I'm going to be a little bit controversial. With many existing new residential greenfield estates, despite each developer looking to differentiate, I think, in my opinion, there is a sameness to a lot of those developments. I understand the importance of delivering affordable housing, but I think as an industry, we can do better. New developments are typically delivering larger houses on increasingly smaller lots, which leaves little space for the softening effects of landscaping. They're predominantly car-based environments, with pedestrians and cyclists not front of mind. Typically, the landscape that exists is removed and the area is recontoured to create flat lots for developers. Jindee, as I mentioned, is very different. So in preparing the codes, a lot of time was spent studying examples of good local architecture, streets and landscape, and then quantifying what makes them work. These are examples of buildings in Cottesloe, Fremantle and Rottnest. or as we say in Perth, Cot, Frio and Roddo. Buildings that were designed to suit the climate, prevailing winds and using local materials. The development was organic and fitted the local context. And what I would like you to do is just remember the image in the bottom right-hand corner, because I'll show you a slide later which reflects some of the built form that's being delivered in Jindee. The same approach is taken for streets and thoroughfares. In most instances, the relationship between the public realm and the private realm is really important. And the same approach was applied for the landscaping. So these are some images of what is quintessentially the landscaping provided in a growth corridor coastal environment. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I haven't got the opportunity of time to talk in a great amount of detail about the codes themselves. But if any of you are interested in learning a bit more about the codes and the process, then either myself or Kath can provide you more information. However, I will give you a very high-level overview. This slide shows transects from the natural on the left through to the rural, suburban and urban core on the right, with images of typical built form in each transect at the top of the screen. Now, the different transects are then applied over the Jindee site from the rural to the urban. It's predominantly a residential suburb, about 1,300 dwellings. Lots ranging from 165 square meters to 3,000. So as you can see on the image, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's what we call Eglinton Hill, which is a large dual landform. A lot of the larger lots are going to be retained within the context of that dual landform, with the smaller lots provided through the road network itself. There is commercial floor space on the right-hand side, adjacent to the major road thoroughfare called Marmion Avenue, which services this growth corridor. And on the left-hand side, adjacent to the ocean, will be a major tourism coastal node, which is still to be built. There are integrated standards provided for buildings, streets and civic spaces. If you look at the image of the streets in particular, it shows there 12 thoroughfare types. I'm not going to go through each of these, but this just gives you an indication of the different thoroughfare types that Jindee provides, from the major avenue through to shared paths. So a whole range of different streets and thoroughfares, and the same applies for buildings and the landscape. The majority of what I want to talk to you about is, well, what is different about Jindee? And if we start with the buildings, here's an image of one of the existing dwellings that's been constructed. All of the dwellings require verandas. The relationship between the dwelling and the street is very important to allow an opportunity for people to talk to each other and communities and friendships to be formed. There are also typically a slight elevation between the dwelling and the street, which helps distinguish between the public and the private realm. Each lot has very specific guidelines on what is permitted. The lots are rear-loaded, which enables a strong building frontage and reduces crossovers and enables greater opportunity for landscaping. Each dwelling requires the approval of a Jindee town architect who checks compliance with the codes and specific requirements for the lot. This ensures a consistently high quality of buildings. The town architect is appointed by the developer and not by the City of Wanneroo. And this is a photo which is similar to the one I mentioned earlier in the previous slide. It reflects, I think, a lot of the characteristics of existing good quality buildings that have been provided in older parts of Perth. It shows that the codes are actually working well. And here's an image of a patio area that's open to the street rather than tucked away behind. Helps provide opportunities for communities to grow, for people to talk to each other. And then I just wanted to provide this as a comparison. This is, I'm not going to talk about which suburb this is, but it's a typical suburban residential street, which is dominated by garages, crossovers, and a lack of landscaping. And I'm sure it's not uncommon for many other developments across Australia. In terms of streets and thoroughfares, one of the fundamental differences is that Jindee is designed for people to be compact, walkable with interconnected laneways where people are encouraged to linger. Whilst cars are catered for, they're not the starting point for the design of the estate. There are lots of interconnected thoroughfares with seating and good quality landscaping. There are also opportunities for passive surveillance. So if you can see on the left-hand side, there's a dwelling that has a relationship to the thoroughfare. You can also see on the left-hand side of the image, there's a piece of children's play equipment, which is integrated into the thoroughfare. I think Jindee isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. One of the issues that we still need to look at in some of these areas is about universal access, so prams and wheelchairs can access. That isn't provided in this example, but there are opportunities in other parts of the estate. This is the same location for the same thoroughfare, but from the opposite direction. This is a more recent thoroughfare, which provides, you can see in the foreground, citrus trees, which have only just been planted. But what I like about this is that the houses relate to the area and create that intimate sense of place. The left-hand wall, whilst quite steep, there is an access way and steps behind the wall so that the residences on the left can access the open space and the laneway. There is a very strong emphasis on street trees and landscaping within the road reserve, which helps with the urban heat island effect, makes areas more attractive and comfortable to walk in a hot climate, and also helps screen large retaining walls. There is sufficient room within the road reserve for all servicing and landscaping, and importantly, landscaping is part of the initial design thinking, not an afterthought. And the last point I want to make on this slide is that the resident isn't expected to maintain the trees and the landscaping, which partly explains why they're thriving. On-street parking is provided and will help slow down traffic as the area grows. You can see there's still a lot of development in the background here. There's still dual landforms that are still to be developed. This is one of the early stages of development with the landscaping still to mature. This is one of my favourite images. It's an image of a real laneway in the estate where the garages don't dominate and they are softened through landscaping. It's an irregular road layout, not linear. The laneways are creating more of a challenge for our refuse trucks. However, my opinion is that the ease of refuse collection should not dictate good design. Having said that, I am having some quite interesting debates with my colleague who's the Director of Assets, who has a different view about refuse collection. And then this is compared to a typical laneway with no landscaping. So you can see the difference between the two. In terms of landscaping, there are around 200 tree species within the codes to choose from. We have had some failures, but majority of the trees that have been selected have been successful. There are also many more trees planted than in other estates and at the early stage in the development process, so it helps them to create that established feel. Plane trees are being used in one of the first streets, which are deciduous and provide shade in summer and passive solar opportunities for the houses in the winter months when the leaves have fallen. It's also important for the understory of the trees. It helps create those green corridors. If you look at the houses in the background, there's approximately 3 meters difference in levels between the house and the road, but because of the landscaping, it doesn't look harsh in any way. And levels within Jindee are celebrated. It's not that each lot is benched and contoured. This is an innovative design of public open space. You might not be able to see, but underneath the structure, there is a large swing. Climbing fig creates a green wall effect, which softens the impact of retaining walls and is being used extensively and successfully throughout the estate. And here's an image of public art that's been provided in the centre of the roundabout near the entrance to the estate. It helps with creating a sense of place, but also in terms of wayfinding. Now, I've included this slide because I think a question that many of you may ask is, it's all right providing this great environment, but how much does it cost? Well, there aren't many lots for sale, and when they do come up for sale, they are snapped up quite quickly, as people are now starting to see a point of difference between this estate and other estates. This lot, or the image here, is a lot of 384 square metres and has a house and land package that's been sold at just over $600,000. And I appreciate for some of you in over east in Sydney and Melbourne, Brisbane, that would be considered incredibly good value. It's probably about the going range for this coastal growth corridor, about 40 kilometres north of Perth. It is roughly half for the land and half for the house. And this slide just demonstrates the image at the bottom, the house that I showed you. The cost to construct is just over 300,000, which compares favourably with other similar dwelling sizes in estates nearby. So what is required from local government? I think the first point is be prepared to innovate. There is an innovation agreement in place with the developer, the council and the West Australian Planning Commission. This has helped to ensure that as a council we look at this development differently and do not apply the same standard approach in terms of landscaping, civil design and built form. It also, being a bit tongue-in-cheek here, but it requires an integrated thinking that planners, engineers and landscape architects need to play nicely together, which isn't always the case. But in this case, I think it's important that there is that integrated thinking. It does require an ongoing education process because Jindee has taken, it's about 20 years, or just over 20 years since the first charrette with Jindee was undertaken to the stage that we're at now where we've got development on the ground. It's been a long process. What that's meant is there's over 20 years, there's a lot of officers at the City of Wanneroo have come and gone. We've been lucky in the sense that the developer has had Hatch Roberts Day initially to provide guidance and continuity through the development. And Roberts Day have been used extensively to educate new officers, new engineers, new landscape architects and planners as they're employed within the City of Wanneroo. So there has been that requirement because it is so different. It has challenged the norm, 100% so. It was resource intensive upfront. It's taken a long time, I think, to develop the codes, given that it's the first example within within Australia. There was a lot of time and energy between the developer, between the West Australian Planning Commission, the city, and all stakeholders in developing scheme provisions, the structure plan provisions and the detail. But having said that, having now got that in place, the rolling out of different stages of development has been very well streamlined. If a development complies or a house complies with the codes, it doesn't require a development approval, it just requires a building permit to be approved, which has helped streamline the time frame to get lots onto the ground. And finally, and probably the most significant for me, is at this stage there's an unknown asset maintenance cost. There is more landscaping. The civic design is different to other estates. That comes at a cost. We haven't received handover of any of the roads and the landscaping and public open space at this time, but I do anticipate there will be a higher maintenance cost for Jindee than other typical areas that the city manages and maintains. It's likely that there will be a need for a specified area rate, but we haven't got to this stage of the process. But that's certainly an unknown quantity. Hopefully that gives you a flavour of Jindee and how different it is. In conclusion, has it challenged us? Yes. Should we consider rolling it out elsewhere? 100%. Is it worth doing? Definitely. Is it something I think that everybody that's involved in it is proud of? Absolutely, we are very proud of what we've delivered in Jindee, and I hope this could be a catalyst for this sort of development elsewhere in Australia. Thank you for your time, and Kath and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was fantastic, and it's really such a unique place. And the questions I had were all the ones you had on your conclusion there. Would you do it again? Was it worth it? And you know, to have a really positive feeling after so much work has gone into it, I think is fantastic.